Good morning, good morning to you. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Good morning, good morning to you. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Good morning, good morning to you. Ooh, ooh. Good morning, good morning. Good morning to you. Oh, good morning. Good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to you. All around the world, good day. Good day to you. Whether it's morning or night or noon, good day. Good day to you. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles. If you can see and hear me clearly, let me know by putting some hearts on the screen. If you can see and hear me clearly, just tap your screen so that I can see some hearts. I hope that everything is going well with you today. Hope that you are doing well. Hope that all is well in your life, all is well in your home, all is well in your spirit, all is well in your soul, all is well in your body. All is well. So, again, I want to thank you for tuning in to Daring Dialogues. My name is Shantae Charles. For those of you who are with us for the first time, I know I haven't done this in a while, but every single day, for most of the year, on weekdays, we cover everything from art to science to history to black history to theology to finance to health to relationships. And of course, on Mondays, we give you some motivation. So, today we are in our Thinking Thursday and we are going to hopefully finish this book up. I'm going to do my absolute best to get us through most of this text today. We are actually very, very, very close to finishing this book. We are about 30 pages away. I don't know that I can finish 30 pages in an hour today, but I'm going to try to get as close to the finish line in this book today as I can, The Cross and the Lynching Tree. So, that being said, all right, that being said, this is where we're going to be spending the majority of our hour today, and I'm going to read until I can finish. We're going to have some discussion, of course, maybe stop a couple of times and kind of question some of the things that Dr. James Cone is saying, but this is where we're going to be today. So we're in really looking at this book. We're actually in his last chapter, and then there's a conclusion. So we're going to finish up, Oh, Mary, Don't You Weep. And he's talking about the role that black women have played in the civil rights movement, the role that black women have played in the movement for justice, the role that black women have played in the faith, in advocacy, all of those different things. And I really appreciate this chapter because so many times theologians, when they are talking about these kinds of subject matter, they don't necessarily spend a whole lot of time on women's roles. So rest in peace, Dr. James Cone, and thank you for giving a whole chapter to black women's roles in the movements. That is to be commended. So we left off talking about the song Strange Fruit and how this was one of the songs that Billie Holiday began to help the nation kind of understand some of the things that was happening in the South. It was a song that drew lots of attention, a song that drew lots of criticism from towards Billie Holiday, and she did have people that toward the end of her life gave her some problems because of this particular song, Strange Fruit. So we're going to continue to talk about what happened as a result of this song being released. All right. And Billie Holiday. Strange Fruit captures the great contradiction in Southern culture and the religion that defined it. Lynching is part of the religion of our people, one white man told another. I want us to think about that for just a second. If someone tells you that lynching is a part of the religion of our people, they are in essence telling you that they are not on the same page as you with the God that you serve. Because the God that you serve would not tell anyone, right? The God of Scripture would not tell them to go out and lynch people and murder people for no reason. Again, just want to reiterate, our former elders and forebears during this time understood that the Christianity that was being practiced by the Southern white gentlemen of their day was not the same faith that they were practicing in their places of worship. They understood it implicitly that it could not have been the same God. I don't know why our current generation has not figured this out. That it's not the same God that we're serving. And I don't care if somebody puts Christian on the front of it, you have to go digging into what is it that they believe. What is their doctrine? What do they believe about black people? Do they believe that black people are equal? Do they believe that black people are human? Do they believe that black people were divinely appointed to serve them as the superior race? People actually still believe that. That is their doctrine. And so you may be a black person attending a majority white congregation whose doctrine intrinsically is that doctrine. So they may allow you to join, they may allow you to attend their place of worship, but their doctrine says that you are beneath them, you are inferior to them. So it's important for people to understand this, all right? Blacks have always wondered how whites could live comfortably with that absurdity. How could white Christians reconcile the strange fruit that they were hanging on southern trees with the strange fruit Romans hung on the cross at Golgotha? How could they reconcile the pastoral scene of the gallant South with the bulging eyes and twisted mouth, the contrast between the scent of magnolia sweet and fresh and the sudden smell of burning flesh? How could the white Christian community reconcile blood on the leaves and blood at the root with the blood on their consciences? Which leads us to another problem, because these are the same people who then become the pro-life advocates of today. So you're pro-life in the sense that you want to rescue babies from being destroyed in the womb, but at the same time, you don't say anything about the blood on the leaves and the blood on the root and the blood on the streets when there's unarmed children being shot dead by rogue police officers. There's no commentary, or there is commentary, it's usually a demonizing of the child. But I thought you were pro-life and you cared about all children. So again, we're still seeing, even in the present day, these sort of contradictions in behavior, in thought, in action, in speech. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, the song says, like the dogs beneath the cross. In Jerusalem, when Jesus was crucified, here is a strange and bitter crop. First sung in 1939 at the Cafe Society, the newly integrated nightclub in New York, Billie Holiday's version of Strange Fruit, as Farrah Jasmine Griffin put it, helped to establish and maintain a political conscience amongst black people about lynching. Griffin contends that Lady Day, as Holiday was called, built upon the work of anti-lynching activists such as Ida B. Wells by assuring that the issue remained at the forefront of black American consciousness. In Strange Fruit, writes Griffin in a deeply moving meditation, Holiday left us a powerful legacy, an enduring song of protest against racial violence. Protest that has been cited by each succeeding generation of black singers to follow her, from Nina Simone to Abby Lincoln to Cassandra Wilson to Dee Dee Bridgewater. Each one sang Strange Fruit in a style of her own, but in the musical and protest tradition defined by Holiday. With vivid and horrific imagery, deep and disturbing emotions, Billie Holiday's rendition of Strange Fruit forced white listeners to wrestle with the violent truth of white supremacy. No white person could listen to Billie's Strange Fruit without feeling indicted and exposed by the sound of truth and contempt in her voice. She made whites look at the brutality they wanted to forget. That is why Strange Fruit was often banned from many radio stations, and several clubs would not let Billie sing it, especially when white people walked out, claiming that it was not entertainment. So, understand this. White people at the time who knew what was going on would walk out of a club when hearing that song sang, but they wouldn't walk away from a tree or stop participating in the reason for the song. Isn't that ironic? Those who stayed to listen were eerily quiet as Billie told the story of lynching in the South. Billie's record company, Columbia, refused to record it, fearing that the South would boycott them, Columbia Music. There is some debate whether Billie understood the lyrics of Strange Fruit when they were first given to her, with mostly white and black scholars lining up on opposite sides of the issue. But what is clear is that Strange Fruit became Billie's song, and she sang it as if she wrote it for those lost on the lynching trees in the South. How much intelligence does a black person need to understand what black body swinging in the southern breeze means? The lynching of African Americans was too widespread in the 1930s, and the NAACP's efforts to get federal anti-lynching legislation enacted were too well known, especially in the black community, for any black group to be ignorant of the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth and the sudden smell of burning flesh symbology. Please understand that just recently, after 200 times, of failing to pass any part of an anti-lynching law, one piece of it has just passed. It passed through, I believe, the House, but it still has to pass through the other side to actually be made a law. All right? They have tried 200 times before that to get something passed. And people can't figure out why our country can't move on, because we have people who are leading who won't even take the initial necessary steps, really, to actually acknowledge our country's past and end some of the violence legally so that we can move forward. All right? With Billie Holiday traveling in the South and with Artie Shaw Band and experiencing insults and threats against her life, there was no way she could have failed to understand the lyrics in Strange Fruit. It became her signature song, the song which she often closed her set. In a larger sense, her singing of Strange Fruit, as Farrah Griffin puts it, has become an indelible part of the African American cultural landscape. Griffin calls Holiday a musical genius whose voice embodies the struggles of Black Americans. She is our lady, our musical icon, whose meaning transcends the suffering this racist society inflicted on her. Although Billie, unlike most black musical artists, did not develop her craft in a black church, her style draws upon the spirit of the black religious experience. spirituals, blues, jazz, and gospel, creating a sound uniquely her own. Billy's Strange Fruit elicits reverence for the dead from blacks and terrible guilt from whites who still reap privileges from the society that lynching created. When blacks hear her sing Strange Fruit, they usually become silent and angry. It is difficult to listen to Lady's haunted and raspy voice without getting mad enough to want to hurt some white people, to hit them upside their head for what their ancestors did to black people, one person noted. Holiday's singing and recording of Strange Fruit in 1939 was a cultural event that raised the political consciousness of musicians and their community. A consciousness that would hit its high water mark with Nina Simone's Mississippi Got, yeah, that word, and Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. When Holiday recorded it, the drummer Max Roach said it was more than revolutionary. Meeropol said Holiday gave a most dramatic and effective interpretation of his poem, which could jolt an audience out of its complacency anywhere. Billie Holiday's styling of the song was incomparable and filled with bitterness and the shocking quality I had hoped the song would have. Lady pianist Mal Waldron said, "It's like rubbing people's noses in their own crap," which Billie did with contempt and defiance. It was best not to say anything as Billie sang Strange Fruit because the song often made her sick to perform it. "I have to sing it," she said, "because fruit goes a long way in telling how they mistreat Negroes in the South." When Maya Angelou's 12-year-old son, Guy, once interrupted her singing to ask, "What's a pastoral scene, Miss Holiday?" her face became cruel and her voice was scornful. It means that it means when the whites are killing the blacks. And of course, she actually didn't use those terms. She actually used a derogatory name for white people in the derogatory name for blacks. Holiday said with a thrust of rage, repelling the boy and stunning her, "It means when they take a little N-word like you and snatch off his man parts and shove them down his throat. That's what it means." Billie could be mean because, as jazz critic Ralph Gleason put it, she was a sort of living lyric to the song Strange Fruit, hanging not on a poplar tree, but on the limbs of life itself. It was fitting for a Jewish man to write this great protest song about burning flesh, because the burning black bodies on the American landscape prefigured the burning bodies of the Jews at Auschwitz and Buchenwald. Strange Fruit was also an early cry for civil rights, a prophetic call for blacks to take up the cross of black freedom because nobody was going to carry it for them, even today. Without Billie's voice, Strange Fruit would hardly be remembered. Abel Meeropol wrote Strange Fruit, but it really belonged to Billie Holiday, who made the song her own and infused black people with opposition to white supremacy that found expression in the modern civil rights and black power movements. Just as the old slave spiritual "Were You There" placed black Christians at the foot of Jesus' cross, Strange Fruit put them at the foot of the lynching tree. Both songs created a dark and somber mood. One was sung in church and the other in a nightclub, but both addressed the same deep down hurt that black people felt and gave them a way to deal with it. As the great theologian Howard Thurman said, a person has to handle suffering or be handled by it. Let me say that again. A person has to learn how to handle suffering or be handled by it. I've said this once, I'll say it again. Because black people in this country have had to learn how to handle suffering, we are in many ways equipped for suffering. We didn't want to be equipped for it, but we had to learn. So did our ancestors. So did our parents. So did our grandparents. Now, you have a whole generation of white people unfortunately, who haven't really had to learn how to suffer in some things. And several newspapers are calling it the disease of despair when they talk about the number of suicides that are happening in the white community. They call it the disease of despair. There wouldn't even be black people around if our ancestors had given in to the disease of despair, because they had plenty to despair about. All right? So while they were being terrorized, they still had to raise children. They still had to get up in the morning and go to work. They went to church. They did life with the undercurrents of terrorism, domestic terrorism, every single day. So that built within them a sort of fortitude for dealing with terrorists, because they were dealing with it every single day of their life, whether it was somebody beating them up, or whether it was somebody terrorizing their ability to earn income, or whether it was somebody trying to sexually assault them and there was no recourse legally, or whether it was somebody coming in their store and saying, give me all your money out of the cash register, you N-word, and you having to figure out how you going to feed your family because somebody just came in under the color of Jim Crow law and stole from you. Those are just a few of the things that was happening during that time. And black people were expected to keep on living as if nothing terroristic was going on. So there was a built-in struggle that they didn't ask for that strengthened them anyway. All right? Black people did not let trouble handle them, and that was why they made music. In the words of Ralph Ellison, for the art, the blues, the spirituals, the jazz, and the dance was what we had in place of freedom. Both the blues and the spirituals spoke about the tragic and the comic, sorrow and joy simultaneously. The struggle to survive in a white supremacist society was a full-time occupation for black people. You didn't get a day off. You still don't. Let's be clear about that. You don't get a day off from white supremacy. There are better days than others, but you don't really get a day off. And it doesn't matter if you're a celebrity or not. You don't get a day off. Okay? And if you... So, how to survive with one's dignity intact? That was the challenge. And the assuring not just their own survival, but also the survival of their family, excuse me. Yet they too aspire for more for life, as womanist theologian Dolores Wilson has insisted. Excuse me. Black men seem less able to navigate this relationship between survival and dignity in the violent patriarchal South. Just out of slavery, black men wanted to be men just like white males. They wanted to be able to, excuse me, they wanted to be able to provide economic support and physical protection for women and children, but they were not permitted to do so, and many times were murdered in their struggle to become men. As a result, black men tended either toward violence, which often placed them on lynching trees, or toward passivity, which led to the loss of their own dignity as men. Few other options were available. I remember, the writer says, I remember my father and mother trying to strike the right balance between survival and dignity in rural Arkansas during the 40s and 50s. My mother was much better at striking the balance than my father, who refused to be intimidated and was determined to support his family as well or better than the average really placed on their wives as these men pursued their quest to be equal to the white male at the time. Because their wives understood, if my husband runs across the wrong white supremacist, he could find himself on a lynching tree. And then, where would that leave your wife and your children and possibly your business? Because back then, you were literally taking a life or death risk when you chose to stand up as an equal to somebody who was disrespecting you. So, this was a common worry and a common issue that Black women of the time had to be worried about. With only a sixth grade education, that was no easy feat. As children, my two brothers and I never worried about our mother's survival or her physical safety, but we often worried about our father, whether whites had waylaid him just for their amusement, or whether he might have been involved in a car accident with a white person, which could again be a life or death situation. Our mother was vigilant and knew whom to contact about his safety. In a patriarchal white society defined by lynching and state-sponsored executions, it was not easy for any Black man to survive the time with dignity. Scholars who criticize Blacks for their otherworldly religion should look a little deeper into the ways that Black people resisted the demonic in their midst, somewhat different from those of men. They were not any easy. James Weldon Johnson and Walter White were more prominent in public leadership roles in the anti-lynching movement. Women were far more active at the grassroots level in churches, in the NAACP, and other male-led organizations. Black women also created their own organizations in which they gained leadership skills, defending their community against vigilante violence. Yes, it took Black men and Black women becoming leaders, stepping up to the plate to fight off vigilante violence in their community. Hint, hint. In all of the churches, women formed organizations where they were the leaders. In 1895, women organized nationally as the National Association of Colored Women, the NACW, and made lynching their main focus. They linked the lynching of Black men with the rape of Black women, showing the blatant hypocrisy of those who identified rape as a crime worse than death, but were not outraged when white men raped Black women. OMG. Sounds like the same movement that's going on right now, and sounds like the movement that has been started to kind of counter or balance out this movement, and it's called First Them. They're actually making the same claim as they made in 1895. Literally. You're saying that rape, that sexual assault, and that all of these things are absolutely horrible, but you're not really outraged when white men commit these crimes. Only Black men. Wow. This is 1895, 2019. We're still having the same conversation. Initially, Black women in the NACW, the churches, the NAACP, and other organizations were less militant than Ida B. Wells, and even pushed her to the margins of their activities. Many were closer to Booker T. Washington, who advised accommodation instead of protest. Accordingly, Black club women focused on the politics of respectability and racial uplift with the motto, lifting as we climb. They believed that if they presented a respectable image of black womanhood, that the whole race would benefit. Only the black woman can say, wrote Anna Julia Cooper, when and where I enter, then and there the whole Negro race enters with me. Yet black women soon found that such accommodation still failed to protect African Americans from the wave of violence that surged across the nation during the early 20th century, and it's still failing. I like to point out to people who say, well, if you just acted a certain way, then people wouldn't harm you. What about all the people who are not doing anything to anyone, who are minding their own business and they're being harmed? Do we not realize that MLK and Malcolm X were both assassinated wearing a suit and not baggy pants? So this is not necessarily about respectability. This is about evil. Demonically inspired evil. And you can't just fight that with external requirements. Just want to help us as a people. You can't just fight that with external requirements. That's why our ancestors didn't just fight it with external requirements. After World War I, they began adopting protest tactics quite similar to Wells. So they recognized that though Ida B. Wells was seen as a radical in her approach, and they kind of pushed her to the fringes, and they want to go with something respectable, when they realized that that wasn't working, they went back to what she was doing. So I just encourage the prophets, just hold on, prophets, hold on. They'll come around. Hold on. So they went back to Ida B. Wells' methods. Anna Julia Cooper, Mary Church Terrell, Mary McLeod Bethune of Bethune-Cookman University, Nannie Helen Burroughs, and others participated in the NAACP's campaign for federal and anti-lynching legislation. These women, these black women, testified before Congress. They raised most of the money for the anti-lynching fund, to bury these people that had been terrorized and murdered in their communities. They led speaking campaigns against lynching that would keep the issue constantly before the American public. They appealed to the white people, the white public, especially white women, to join with the black community in opposition against mob violence. But Susie had a hard time joining with black women against mob violence because her husband, her cousin, her brother, her uncle, and her grandpa were involved in lynching. So if they looked up and they saw Susie Q amongst the black women talking about don't do this, Susie Q was going to find herself in some abusive trouble. So it all ties together. The Negro women of the South, Charlotte Hawkins Brown, told white women, lay everything that happens to the members of her race at the door of the Southern white woman. We all feel that you can control your men. This is what she said. We feel that so far as lynching is concerned, that if the white woman would take hold of the situation, that lynching would be stopped. Novel idea. A few white women and men accepted the challenge of opposing lynching, but they were careful not to violate the separation of the races. The Commission of Interracial Cooperation, the CIC, was organized in 1919. 100 years later, here we are. And the Association of Southern Women for the Prevention of Lynching in 1930. So black people will help you, but we still want to be segregated. We still want to form our own organization because we still want to be separate from you all, but we will help. Both organizations were comprised of white Southern moderates who rejected rape as the justification for lynching and sought to convince whites that lynching had no place in a civilized society. The real victim in the crime of lynching, the Georgia chapter of ASWPL, stated in their official declaration, is not the person done to death, but constituted and regularly established government. The CIC's Southern Commission on the Study of Lynching made a similar declaration. Lynching makes a mockery of courts and citizenship. The state itself has been lynched. Thus, rather than gathering up their skinfolk and kinfolk, whites focused on the anarchy issue that lynching created for white people. They focused on the legal aspects. They focused on the constitutional aspects. They hardly said an actual adequate word about the devastating effect of the lynching atrocity in the black community. So they didn't, and I think this is important, they did not appeal to their fellow kinsmen on the grounds of these are fellow humans. I need us to understand that. They did not appeal to them on the grounds that these are fellow humans. These are your fellow brothers. These are your fellow sisters. Why are you doing this? You know why they didn't? Because I'm sure they understood intrinsically that you were not seen as human to them. So they could not appeal on a human level that lynching was wrong. Because if I don't see you as human and I think you're an animal, then trying to appeal to me about your humanity isn't going to work. So they appealed on the grounds of legality rather than humanity. Like Wells and other black Christians, club women viewed white Christianity as a contradiction of true Christian identity, largely because of its support of segregation and lynching. How can you be a Christian and support segregation and lynching? How can you be a Christian and support the abuse of immigrant children? How can you be a Christian and support the abuse of unarmed citizens? How can you be a Christian? I'm wondering. Would to God that it were, complained the National Baptist leader Nellie Burroughs when she rejected America's Christian identity. But it is the most lawless and desperately wicked nation on the globe, she said. Lynching, she insisted, was no superficial thing. It is in the blood of the nation, and the process of eliminating it will be difficult and long. Though Nellie Burroughs was a deeply committed Christian, she, like many black women leaders before and after, urged blacks to resist the temptation of spiritual passivity as if God would liberate them without their own participation. Speaking in 1933 on the theme, "What Must the Negro Do to Be Saved?" at Bethel AME Church in Washington, D.C., she said, "Don't wait for deliverers. There are no deliverers. The Negro must serve notice to the world that he is ready to die for justice. We are a race on this continent that can work out its own salvation." Therefore, she urged, work as if all depends upon you, and pray as if all depends upon God. There was no linking of the cross and the lynching tree amongst the black club women. Like Wells, they focused their concern on fighting lynching and achieving full equality for all black people. While men talked, women walked and got things done. I'll take a sip on that. Although the civil rights movement was headed primarily by male leaders such as Martin Luther King, Ralph Abernathy, Andy Young, and others, Baker, Septima Clark, and many more, Women were the spine. Women were the spine of the movement. So, if you take the spine out of the movement and you redirect the spine's attention to everybody else's movement, then you get paralyzation for the Black community. I need somebody to quote that today. If Black women were the spine of the civil rights movement, and you take that spine out and redirect her attention to everybody else's movements and rights and causes except her own community, then you have just paralyzed the Black community. And some of us still don't realize that. It was women going door to door, speaking with their neighbors, meeting in voter registration together, organizing through their churches, that gave the vital momentum and energy to the movement that made it a mass movement. So everybody else has figured out the importance of Black women tagging along to their movement or supporting their movement, which is why it's important for Black women to make sure that you're supporting something that's ultimately going to benefit your community. It makes no sense for me to put my energy behind something, all right? It makes no sense for me to put my energy behind something that's going to cause paralyzation in my own community. That's foolishness. So, as Black women, we have to look at that. Why are we giving our spine, strong Black women, why are you giving your spine to other people's causes while your own community is suffering from paralyzation? Our ancestors didn't do that. Come on. Our ancestors did not do that. Our ancestors did not put other people's communities above their own. Now, if I'm wrong, email me. Give me some proof. readshante@gmail.com. That was why Nellie Burroughs said, the men ought to get down on their knees to Negro women who made possible all we have around us: church, home, school, and business. And most importantly, the civil rights movement. While it has often been said that the civil rights movement was a religious movement and led by male ministers, that was only partly true. So this Black History Month, I'm going to need people to actually focus on the other women players who were part of the civil rights movement. So when you have in your speech and your child is doing reports and y'all are out there at the parades and all that other stuff that's going to go on throughout this month, I want you to pay attention to the women of the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was also a women's movement, because then they understood that the Black family needed movement. The Black family needed equal rights. The man, the woman, and the child. Exactly. Definitely didn't learn much about Black women civil rights leaders past Rosa Parks. I'm in school. Good. All right. The civil rights movement was a women's movement. Yes, it was. But people of today would have you believe that there was no women's movement for Black women. So they will say to you, come join our movement and we'll make sure that your needs are taken care of. Know that history. Women started this movement. If Rosa Parks had not sat down, Martin Luther King Jr. would not have stood up. Sustained it through difficult times, and made their faith its central focus through song, giving hope that we shall overcome. Because, as the great Ella Baker said, we who believe in freedom shall not rest until it comes. Where there is hope, there is God. That divine presence that prevents despair and empowers poor people to resist. Nowhere were hope and resistance more abundant than amongst Black women. And everybody else has figured this out. So, yes, they will use you, Black women, to mobilize their own causes. If you let them use you, they will use you. And when they get tired of using you to mobilize their cause, then they will say some stupid stuff to you and tell you to denounce people in your community while they haven't denounced not one white supremacist yet. Good morning, love. Oh, yes. They will use people like Tamika Mallory to help them get the Women's March started. And then when they have it rolling the way they want it to, now they want to turn around and boot her out of the organization. Why? Because they understood the power of a Black woman helping to mobilize a movement. Sometimes people study your history more than you do. All right? So, every Black male minister knows that he would have no church. Uh-oh, see, Lord, let me sip my OJ. Somebody finna be mad, but it gotta be said. Every Black male minister, every Black male leader, every Black male preacher knows that he would have no church without women who make up more than 80% of the membership. Here, here. No women, no movement. The same was true of the civil rights movement, whose energy was defined by its religious focus expressed in prayer and song. So if I want to paralyze the Black community, I've got to take the spine out of the Black community, and I've got to redirect that spine, that Black female, I've got to redirect her to another place. Whether it's redirecting her out of the home, redirecting her away from Black men, redirecting her away from producing Black children. The key is redirection. And when your spine is gone, paralyzation sets in. History of Black people seems to be the instruction manual for others to manipulate us. You said something, prophet. Now we could only use our own history to empower ourselves, right? The same was true of the civil rights movement, whose energy was defined by its religious focus, expressed in prayer and song. Songs like, "Walk with me, Lord, walk with me. Walk with me, Lord, walk with me while I'm on my tedious journey. I want Jesus to walk with me." Listen, Black women, it's time to put the spine back in our community. Actions speak louder than words is a well-known saying in the Black Christian community. Through their actions, women express the conviction that their nonviolent suffering could save not only the Black community from white supremacy, but even save America from its worst self. When Fannie Lou Hamer, a Mississippi sharecropper who became a civil rights heroine, sought to inspire blacks to risk their lives for justice in Mississippi, she turned to the cross and embellished it with her religious imagination. She told black people who were too afraid to fight for their rights. When Simon Cyrene was helping Christ to bear his cross up the hill, Simon said, "Must Jesus bear the cross alone and all the world go free? No, there's a cross for everyone, and there's a cross for me. This consecrated cross I'll bear till death shall set me free, and then go home a crown to wear, for there's a cross for me." Like other poor blacks, Hamer had no access to sophisticated biblical studies and thus used a familiar evangelical hymn popular in black churches to make her point about our responsibility to become an agent of change. Her hermeneutics were shaped by the spirituals and the tradition of gospel hymns and her involvement in the black freedom struggle. Yet we have all this education today, and some of us have let education kind of cloud our responsibility to freedom. She didn't have a theology degree, but she understood we all have a responsibility to bear when it comes to the rights of our community and seeking justice. Thousands of poor blacks were inspired by her reflection and followed her throughout Mississippi, many of them to endure jail, beatings, and even death. Where is a similar example of motivation and courage among religious and theology professors and students in our institutions of higher learning? Where it is. Where is it? Where it is. Where is it? Yet Hamer did not embrace the cross uncritically. She was aware of its dangers. "We have always been taught," she said, "that we had to suffer as Christ suffered. He was killed and all his followers were persecuted. But I think in terms of what David had to do. David was a shepherd boy. He was giving service to his people. But it came a time in his life when he had to slay his Goliath." As Bernice Johnson Regan writes, Fannie Lou Hamer places Jesus where his experiences, as interpreted through the traditions of the black church, could be used in the freedom struggle. Fannie embraced the cross and brought its full force to bear on the work that she had to do. Hamer understood the religious meaning of the cross because she interpreted it in the context of being beaten and shot at and nearly lynched for her own civil rights work. But no amount of affliction could stop her resistance work. They whipped her body, but they did not whip her soul. And many people don't realize this or don't know this about Fannie Lou Hamer, but she was in a sense lynched. She experienced a medical lynching. She went in for a normal procedure, and while she was under anesthesia, they gave her a hysterectomy without her consent. They took out her ability to bear children without her consent, saying that it would be dangerous for her to produce another child like her. But your fingernail broke today, and you don't feel like going on. Sit down somewhere. Listen. The cross gave her courage to keep on fighting what womanist scholar Angela Sims, reflecting on the ethical complications of lynching, calls an ethics of resilience. The truth of what she said about Jesus was defined by its practical results. And if today, like Fannie Lou Hamer, I cling to the old rugged cross, it is because I have seen with my own eyes how that symbol empowered Black people. It empowered Black people. It didn't suppress them, unlike many of the lies being told today. A true understanding of Christ in the cross empowered Black people to stand up and become agents of change for their freedom. After telling the country and the world at the 1964 Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City about her attempts to register and vote and the vicious beating that followed in a Mississippi jail, Fannie Lou Hamer asked the poignant question that stirred the conscience of most Americans watching her speak over live television. Is this America? Her power and eloquence captivated the nation. She knew that even liberal whites could not deny the truth about white supremacy in America. Yet they did not want to hear that truth, and they still don't. The fact that America's dependency in the lives of its Black population. President Lyndon Johnson, at the time a Texan, knew all too well the hard truth of Hamer's testimony. Immediately after seeing and hearing her speak, you want to know what kind of have? Immediately after seeing and hearing her speak, he called the new order to get illiterate woman off live television. Wait a minute. You're the president of the United States, and you're so intimidated by the truth she just spoke that you hold a press conference. You're so intimidated by her quote unquote illiteracy that you hold a press conference to get her off live television. You interrupt her on television by doing your own press conference just so people won't continue to hear the truth coming out of her mouth. You call a presidential press conference to interrupt television to prevent the truth from getting out to the American people. Oh, Lord. The Black religious experience gave Miss Hamer the spiritual power to resist, a power incarnated in many Blacks that I've seen throughout the South during my childhood. It was the kind of blessed assurance that they believed could come only from Jesus' cross, from having been washed in his blood. I question America, Miss Hamer said to millions of Americans as she ended her address. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off the hooks because our lives are threatened daily, because we want to live as simply decent human beings in America? Lou Hamer's question was a paradoxical yes and no. Yes, in the sense that this was the America that Blacks had experienced, but no, in the sense that we should not accept this America. We would not be satisfied until justice was made a reality in the land. And even today, we are still needing justice to be made a reality in the land. We intended to make America the America it was supposed to be, or die trying. This was not a get rich or die trying movement. It was a get righteousness, get justice, or die trying movement. Langston Hughes expressed the feelings of all Blacks when he said back in 1936, "Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain seeking a home where he himself is free. America never was America to me. Oh yes, I say it plain. America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be." Langston Hughes, 1936. To redeem the soul of America, and I'm closing for today. To redeem the soul of America, to make America a land where opportunity is real and life is free, was the motto of the Civil Rights Movement as defined by Martin Luther King Jr., the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Congress of Racial Equality, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the organization in which Fannie Lou Hamer was an active participant. Women in all the civil rights organizations embodied in their lives the faith that God was in the Black freedom movement, redeeming America's through nonviolent suffering. We stood up, a Black woman participant said. Me and my God stood up. As the oral historian Charles, faith in the Lord made faith in the possibility of social change. The civil rights movement was a sign that God was stirring. So we're going to stop there for today. We are almost done with this particular chapter. So, Lord willing, we'll get a chance to finish up this chapter next week, and then we'll get back into Letters to the Church and also Pagan Christianity by Frank Viola and George Barna. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I've been your host today, Shantae Charles. I hope that I have encouraged you. I hope that I have educated you today. I hope that I have given you some names that you can look up, like Septima Clark, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ida B. Wells, Billie Holiday. Go ahead and search for Billie Holiday's song Strange Fruit and take a listen to it if you've never heard the Billie Holiday version. There's also a version out by Nina Simone. Share it to your page as we begin to go into the quote unquote designated month of Black History. But if you're Black, let me just remind you that you're living Black history every day. You are living Black history. All right. So again, I want to thank you for your time and attention. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So please go out today, if you're in a part of the country where you can go out, and be light. If not, be an encouragement today on social media. Be an encouragement online. Be an encouragement wherever you find yourself today in the marketplace, either in person or online. Take care and God bless.